Welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to talk about getting back on track with organization hacks. So we're going to talk about tips and tricks to organize your finances so you'll experience less financial stress. In the chat, if you could please introduce yourselves and tell us where you're joining us from. That would be great. I'm Jerry V. Canlas, and I'm joined by my colleagues here today, Vincenza Vicari Bentley. We are the program coordinators for the Empowering Financial Wellness program with USU Extension. And this webinar is brought to you by Utah State University Extension with partnership with the Utah Department of Workforce Services. Today, we're going to jumpstart your finances with foolproof strategies for getting your finances back on track as we share with you strategies to organize your finances and get your finances back into shape this new year. So we're glad you can join us today. So just to start off, we are going to have a poll and it will ask just a couple of questions. So will be great if you answer our questions. First one is, in the past year, have you ever found yourself surprised by unexpected bills or expenses? So yes or no. I found myself this year surprised by an unexpected bill or one or two bills maybe, or unexpensed one or two expenses.
What was it, Jeremy? You want to share?
Can
you share?
Yeah, I had to leave the workforce back in May. So before I started this job in September. And so there were a couple of things that we didn't plan for that now we had to look where to fund those things because we had our income reduced significantly when I had to quit my job in May. So yeah, that's one thing. Have you ever spent a lot of time looking for a password or resetting it because you forgot it? This is so me.
Me too.
I tried to use just one password, but I was told that wasn't very smart.
No,
it's not smart. So now I just have to remember and use a couple strategies to not forget them.
We'll talk about that today.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the other question is, have you ever wondered why so much or so little was taken out of your paycheck when you file your income taxes? This was more my husband's dilemma almost every tax season. He's like, what? Why? How'd that happen? So I guess a lot of people, some people, have that experience when, tax filing comes along and it's our W-2s are coming in the mail or we're now able to download them as we head into the tax season. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay.
I think everybody's responded.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll now and we'll talk more about how to become more organized so we can, so that we don't experience these things very often. And once in a while we'll experience this, but our goal is to find ourselves in a better position when these things happen. So I'm going to turn the time now to Vincenza and she's going to talk about some of our tips and tricks to help you become more financially organized.
All right, so this is just an overview of what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to be talking about revolving savings accounts and sinking funds. We're going to talk about passwords and how to be safer with those. We're going to talk about taxes because, tax season has officially started. And we're going to talk about how to do a checkup on your paycheck and how to review and evaluate. So one of the first things I want to talk about is a revolving savings account. And I don't know if any of you have heard of that before, but basically what it is, it's a strategic way to save for those expected expenses that you may have planned, but they don't happen every single month. And so it's a bill you might pay once a year, twice a year, maybe seasonally. And it's also a way to save for unexpected expenses. For example, it's coming down the line, you don't know exactly when. For example, maintenance, repair, replacing appliances, things like that. It's eventually going to happen. And the more time you have to save for those things, it's less of a pinch on your monthly budget. It's also a great idea to automate it, and make a set amount at set intervals. And it is separate from an emergency savings account. So when we talk about savings goals, the first place you have to start with is obviously having a realistic budget. I've worked with I'm a financial counselor, and I've worked with a lot of clients that would often tell me, I'm saving money, but then I find myself having to dip into my savings to cover something that was unexpected. And that's usually because they don't have a handle on their day-to-day spending or a budget. So it's a really good idea to have a budget so that you know exactly how much you can afford to save. And you start with just making sure most people know what their fixed expenses are. It's the same amount every month. And you start with that. And then you go over your variable expenses, like some of your utilities might change month to month. And then you look at whatever is left over. And then, you can decide, is this going to go into savings? Which savings bucket? Is it going to go toward paying down debt, et cetera? So if you were with us last week, we did talk about the step down principle, which is a strategy. If you are looking for ways to have some money freed up for savings, that's a great principle that you could apply in this situation. Revolving savings accounts. I'm also going to talk about sinking funds, which I mentioned in the overview. They're very similar, and there's a very small difference between them, but we thought we would talk about both of them so you can decide if one way works a little bit better than the other, or if you want to do both. But they both ultimately have the same goal. So here's an example of what a revolving savings account worksheet would look like. I pulled these off of, one was from our PowerPay Money Master course, and one was on Utah State University. I just Googled revolving savings. There's lots of printables out there, fillables. And if you like, we can share those with you afterwards in a follow-up email if you're interested in those. But, it's about finding what works for you. So if you look at this example, this is an account. It's a revolving savings account. So you deposit money in each month, knowing that money is going to be going for a specific thing. And as you can see on the worksheet on the left side, for example, family birthdays. Maybe some of you have a family birthday every month, but maybe within your own family, you would budget a certain amount of money. Car registration, maybe there's 2 cars in this family, so one's going to hit the budget in January and May. And then what you do is you spread that out. So if in the year, for example, for auto registration, you have $300, you would take that amount and you would divide it by 12. And every month you would just put that money aside into a revolving savings account so that when that expense does come up, the money is there and you're not surprised by it. It's sort of call it like your cushion for these expenses that we said that are not regular because they don't come every month. So how do you fund a revolving savings account? So just some strategic ideas. If you set it up automatically, it's going to happen. You're not going to forget about it. And you're going to get used to that, not having that money, and then it's just going to savings. And then when you need it to pay that bill, you can pay from that account or you can move it back into your checking account. So it's possible to overlook planning for them. And that's why I think this is such a great idea, is to have this revolving savings account. The other thing you can do is make it a line item in your monthly budget. So for example, just have it as a line item. Just make it, if you don't want to specifically have money transferred into a savings account, you can just have it as a line item in your budget. So, okay, I'm budgeting $25 every month for car registration, and it's just going to be sitting in your checking account. It requires a little bit more tracking of that. But again, I think with personal finance, it's personal more than it is finance. And it's really about what works for you, whatever method. And so maybe you have to try a few different methods and see what sticks with you and what makes sense for you. The other thing is you can use extra funds from an over calculation in your budget. Like for example, with my electric bill. My electric bill is not the same every month. So I put in a certain amount, let's say I put in $100. And then I got my bill and it was only $70. So now I have $30. So I could either move that $30 into my revolving savings account so that in the event there's a month where the bill is a little bit higher, I have that cushion to fund that expense. Okay, so I'm going to move on and have Jeremy talk about. I wanted to say one other thing about funding, some ideas for how to actually fund a savings account. So you can do automatic payroll deposits. So if you want it deposited directly from your paycheck, you could have that done, or you could just set it up with your bank where you do transfers at certain times of the month. And then you can also, I was talking about, you can use a tax refund. For example, we're in tax season. You might be getting a tax refund, and maybe you just take that and you jumpstart a revolving savings account, or maybe you're going to get a bonus from work or something unexpected. And that can be a great way to jumpstart having that cushion fund. And then you can start divvying out and seeing what that money is actually going to be used for. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy, and we're going to talk about sinking funds.
Okay, so sinking funds, but before we jump into the sinking funds, I just had a thought too. When we're thinking about how, to fund those revolving savings account, I know in our blog, utahmoneymoms.com, Amanda Christensen talks about the 1% savings account. So automatic from your paycheck, 1%, you won't even feel it, won't even hurt. It just goes to your, to your dedicated revolving savings account or a sinking fund even, which is more specific than a savings account because it's typically for some of your short-term goals, but it's still the same principle. You put a certain amount of money aside at set intervals, and it's simply a strategic way to save, to put money away. And when you have a sinking fund, you can anticipate the upcoming expenses and plan towards it. There's no element of surprise and no changes to be made to your other savings buckets. The strategy is that you intentionally set aside a specific amount of money each month. And so that by the time your event arrives, you're not scrambling to pay for everything because you're well prepared. So saving over time for unexpected expenses, such as, like new tires for your car or a repair for the house, or, that another extra Christmas gift. Now we're looking back on the holiday season, and we're like, I think I spent too much on Christmas gifts. So maybe next Christmas, then we can prepare for those things. If we start a sinking fund right now. And then those purchases will be less stressful. So how does it work? Each month you save money across multiple categories. You create those categories as you wish. Those amounts will be used on a later date. And start by making a list of your yearly irregular expenses, and then decide which ones you want to include. So some people, I know some people, they would even have, when they open when they have a bank account, they have baby bank accounts within that account, and then certain percentage of those funds just automatically get transferred to this birthday account or travel account or Christmas account, and you give it a nickname, so it makes it easier for you. You know where the money went and where to get that money when it's time for it to be spent. Other people find that very stressful because now you feel like you have too many bank accounts to be managing. So what they do is they just have this one big account. They have their own spreadsheet. You have those categories. In our Power Pay Money Master course, we talk about a zero-based monthly budget worksheet. And a zero-based budget doesn't mean you have nothing else. You don't have. It doesn't mean you have nothing to budget. It just means that at the end of the exercise, when you budget your money, that every penny had a job. So you can create this as another job for whatever income you have or whatever money coming in to you. So
I had a thought, Jeremy.
Yeah, go ahead.
So people might be, I wonder if anybody's wondering, how is this different from an emergency savings? So emergency savings is for emergencies. It's not something that you're necessarily anticipating. here, this is a very intentional, strategic way to save things that you know are eventually coming down the line. So we just want to clarify that this would be separate from your emergency savings.
Yes,
Yeah.
and Christmas is not an emergency.
Right.
An emergency, yeah, yeah. You have to think through that. What is an emergency and what is not an emergency? Okay. So how it takes a bit of planning, but it can seriously reduce your financial stress. So let's say I finished my budget. Hey, let's show them an example. So here's an example. I have $300 available in my monthly budget. Um, and I've got everything covered. This $300 is like an overage. Yay, I have $300 that has it doesn't have a job, right? But let's give it a job. So we'll allocate $100 for vacation, $50 for the Christmas gift fund, $50 for out-of-pocket medical expenses, your copay or your co-insurance, whatever it is, $50 for car repairs, and then $50 for home repairs. That's a total of $300. You have 5 sinking fund categories. Every month you set aside these amounts for these specific categories. At the end of the year, you've saved $1,200 for vacation. You have $600 for Christmas gifts. I want to be on your Christmas list now that you have $600. You have $600 for medical expenses. So a trip to the emergency room doesn't have to be too stressful now, but hopefully nobody goes to the emergency room, right? $600 for car repairs and $600 for home repairs. So we're not saying this is going to cover everything. What we're saying is you have cushion, you have something, you have a bucket where you could put your hand in and, okay, I have money there, and it doesn't have to be too stressful because there's nothing at all to spend.
And, also there's flexibility. For example, I mean, I use sinking funds, and I've actually saved more money than I needed, like for dentist stuff. I thought one of us was going to need a new crown. That's usually around $500. Well, it's been 2 years and nobody's needed that crown. So you have the flexibility, obviously, to shift these things and say, okay, I'm going to put that toward this other thing that maybe I underestimated for, or, well, we didn't use this money, so let's just put it toward vacation. So that's the beauty of it too, is you might find that you saved too much money, and nobody's ever going to be mad at themselves for saving too much money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you have that, flexibility. And if you've never done this before, it might be hard to estimate, but if you can look back and see, like, what did I spend last year on Christmas? Like, January is a great time to jumpstart all this stuff because you got the whole year ahead of you. The more time you have obviously ahead of you, the more time you have to save for things. So it's a great time of year to be thinking about planning the rest of the year.
Yeah, I like that. I love that you mentioned how flexible these categories can be, because sometimes at the end of the year, or you get to a point where you're like, okay, maybe you want to really go on that vacation, but you didn't have any home repairs that year, so move that $600 to that vacation fund. That's totally fine. It just depends on your situation. It just depends on your circumstances. But it's totally flexible. The thing is, the important thing is, and the beauty of this is intentional. Like Vincenzo said, nobody's gonna get mad at you, or you're never gonna get mad at yourself for saving too much money, for having saved a certain amount of money for whatever reason that you planned out to save that money for.
And there are a lot of great apps too that help you do this automatically. Like, I use a budgeting app, and it gives me the option, like, if you don't spend the money that you said you're going to spend this month, do you want to carry it over to the next month? And that's what I do. And so I don't have to manually keep track of all those sinking funds. So that's something else to think about. If you have an app, or you're looking for an app and you want to do a sinking fund, see if there's that option. And if you've never done this before, maybe it's good to put pen to paper and just start doing it pen to paper until you get comfortable with it. But I just want to let you know there's technology out there too to help you with that.
And another thing too is, when you have money set aside, no matter how much it is, it just you just avoid that temptation to charge it on your credit card when you're already, especially when you're already trying to pay off your balance, and then you're adding another charge on there on top of what you already owe. This is a really good strategy, to get yourselves organized, especially at the beginning of the year. But you can start doing this at any point, during the year. January is just a really great time because you can reflect on how much you've spent the last year. So I think we have a question in the chat. um, Rand was asking, what savings app do you use? Vincenzo, do you have any recommendations or from your experience?
Yes, there are a lot of great apps out there. And so again, it's about finding what works for you. I found that Mint works for me. There was a bit of a learning curve when I first started using it, and the product has gotten better. It's free. And you can choose to link your bank accounts, savings accounts, or not. That's totally up to you. It's been very secure for me. And I love it. I also do a paper budget. I don't keep track of the sinking funds on paper, but I do a paper budget just because there's something about having that also written out, just in case technology were to fail, because sometimes it does. And so it's worked awesome for me. And I love it. And it's made a tremendous improvement in my sense of peace and like not worrying about, and then, talking through like, what are some things, like I'll talk to my spouse and say, are there some things I'm not thinking about? Like he said, well, your car's going to need new tires because we swapped out the winter tires, and your whether your summer tires are not good anymore. So, okay. So now I've got 7 months or 6 months to save for that. So that helps me. I don't have to come up with that big expense, come summertime or come when I take the winter tires off. So things like that, just you start thinking about, like we know if you buy Christmas gifts, Christmas is December 25th every year. That's a set things, but other things might be flexible. Like sometimes I would forget about I have an annual deductible for my health insurance. That's a few $100s. And so the first time you go to the doctor, it's not paid for. You got to pay for it out of pocket. So all these little things, just nothing, everything is not an emergency anymore. It's like nothing is really, doesn't have to be a crisis. It can be like, oh yeah, I got this. I set aside some money for that. And it's been awesome.
Mary has another question, which is great because this is going to take us to one of our another tip that we have to financially organize your life. So are you worried at all about the security of apps? So we'll talk about, well, we're not going to talk about the apps, but we're going to talk about passwords, because that's what's going to breach your security. So Vincenzo is going to talk about a little bit more about those.
Yes.
Thanks for your question, Mary, by the way.
Yeah, and Mary, just to say, always make sure you use something that has two-factor identification. So when I log into my account, it asks me, look at the picture, like, so then it knows you're not a robot, and then it sends a code to my phone, and then I have to verify. So I think that's super important that you set that up. So passwords, I don't know about you guys, but it's like everything requires a password. We're online all the time. And I wanted to share with you that there is a data breach. I don't know if you knew about this. Happened a few years ago, back in 2013, and it affected Yahoo. It affected every single customer account that Yahoo had. So when they first disclosed it, it was like 1 billion. And by the time they ended up going through it, it was 3 billion people were affected. And that included unencrypted security questions and answers. You know how you have to set up what's your mother's maiden name or whatever those questions are. So they had access to all of that. So the moral of the story is, like Jeremy was saying, don't reuse passwords, because if they have a password that you've repeated at lots of different places, they have the keys to the kingdom. So be really careful about that. And there's just some simple options. Again, it's what works for you. You can use a password storage location. So back in the day, my husband and I used to keep an Excel spreadsheet. And every time we open an account or start something, we'd type it in and we'd update it. Well, it ended up being like a 30 page, so 15 pages, two-sided with passwords. And then, crossing it out, writing it over. It just got to be really tedious, and that wasn't working for us. So we looked at using a digital storage location, which you can do. So if you're going to use a paper password storage location, you can use a blank notebook. They even sell, like if you Google or you go on Amazon, you can find they actually sell paper password books to help you organize your passwords and usernames. I would say keep it near your computer where it's handy so you can write it down anytime you change it or create a new one. And then you want to make sure you keep this book secure. Again, if somebody were to get a hold of it, so consider putting it like in a fireproof safe or
my,
something.
my sister, I don't know, my sister-in-law gifted this to me for Christmas. It's an internet password keeper.
Cool.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
yep, it's out there. If you're old school like me and like paper and writing on paper, there's
Yep.
stuff there.
Awesome. You can use a digital storage option. So there's a lot of online software or apps where you can store your login credentials. And that way your usernames and passwords are with you no matter where you go, because you can take your phone with you and you can access it. But the main drawback of a digital storage location is, of course, possible hacking. So be sure when you look at digital products, compare the options, read reviews about the product, and choose one that you're comfortable with, that that looks like it's pretty secure. Um, and there are lots of different types of, let's see, there's LastPass, there's a whole list of um, NordPass, Remember, Bitwarden, sticky passwords. Again, you could log in. I just mentioned free options. There are some that are paid. Again, I personally use LastPass. It's free. They always try to upsell you, and if you want like a slightly different product. What I like about it is that if my husband creates a new password and he wants to share it with me, he can do that digitally. And then I get a message, and then it says, Adam Bentley wants to share this thing with you. Do you want to accept the password or whatever? And then it automatically stores it in my profile so that I can see that too. So it's worked for me, but again, it's about finding what you like best. You could do a combination of both. You could do a paper and you could do digital, just in case, again, technology were to fail.
Michaela just shared on the chat that, and this is true, password saving, our phones have password saving capabilities now. When I access my bank accounts on using their app, I have, what do you call it? I use my thumbprint. You can set that up, and Face ID is something that some apps you're able to do with some apps as well. So yeah, but still, just be careful. You sometimes even, when my phone is too sticky, it won't recognize my thumbprint. So I still have to write that down and keep my passwords in a safe place. But Face ID is great. My phone doesn't have to deal with my sticky face or something, but my sticky thumbs is a problem sometimes. So I still write it down. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, Michaela.
All right, so I'm going to move on to taxes. So tax season is here. Last time I checked, it's still going to be April 15th, 2021. I thought maybe they would extend it because of the pandemic, but it looks like not. So one of the things that we want to talk about is kind of doing a review about your taxes. So Jeremy's going to take you through some hacks for organizing your personal taxes.
Okay, well, who's intimidated by taxes? I used to be. I still get nervous every time I touch those documents. I have to put this in right. This has to be right. I don't want to pay extra. I don't want to be audited or whatever. But if you don't want to get into that pickle of, being scared that you might get audited or whatnot, make sure that you have all your information updated. Okay, so first things first, let's look at, your withholding status. That's what affects how much is taken out of your taxes. Christy Lynn just said on the chat that her brain loves taxes, and I might want to borrow her brain one of these days, or one of us might want to do that. But yeah, it's good practice for everyone to do a paycheck checkup every year, just so you know what your withholdings are, what your deductions are, what do they look like, especially if there were changes in your family. Just so it's up to date, your information is up to date. The earlier in the year you do this, the more accurate you can be when it comes time to file your taxes. And then whether you've filed yet or not, it only takes a few minutes to do a paycheck checkup. Now, most companies now, you're able to review your pay stub, check your withholdings, or you can give your HR a quick call. Like I said, especially if there were changes in your family, if if you went through a divorce, or if you had another baby, or you just got married, things like that. Not paying enough during the year can result in a tax bill and perhaps a penalty in some cases when you file your tax return. According to the IRS, last year, the average refund was $2,700. That could be an extra $225 a month in your paycheck instead of waiting a whole year to get that back. And I love that idea of, because for the longest time I thought, oh, I love it when I get my tax return. It's huge or whatnot, right? I'm not saying it's like a huge one, but it's like something you're looking forward to. But what if you didn't have to wait for the whole year to get that refund? If you didn't get a refund, it means you paid right. Your deductions were just right. So think about it that way. If you need to check your withholding status, check with your employer to see what your current withholding is. So that's indicated in your W-4. That's not a set in stone thing. Okay, remember that when your life status changes, you can go back in there and change your withholdings. Um, you can also use the IRS withholding calculator on irs.gov. This tool will help you determine the right amount of tax withheld from your paycheck. It will also ask you to estimate your 2021 income, number of children you claim for the child tax credit, earned income tax credit if you qualify for that, and other items that will affect your 2021 taxes. So gather your most recent paycheck, have your most recent income tax return handy, and do your homework. In 2020, this is important, the W-4 changed considerably. It tries to provide you now a simpler and more accurate way to get your tax, uh, to get your tax, the correct amount of tax withheld from your paycheck, especially if there's multiple earners in your household or if you have multiple jobs. It takes that into consideration now, so you get a more accurate amount for your withholdings. Um, if you do end up making changes to your withholding, be sure to check the results on your paycheck after you requested the adjustment to make sure it's correct, and make sure that it may take 1 or 2 pay periods. So it's best to check with your employer to be sure. So like we said, it does take some legwork, get those papers together, review them, check with your employer, download your pay stubs. Not a lot of people now, especially when we get paid electronically, we don't even touch our pay stubs, don't even see them unless we check them. And this is important because who knows, maybe there was a mistake in your information that your HR set up for you, a wrong number in your social security, and all of a sudden all of a sudden your retirement is going to somebody else, or it's floating out there in the cloud. I don't know. So please check it. The earlier the better. Yeah.
All
so
right.
we love your questions and your suggestions on the chat. Thank you so much for participating today. We hope that you had a great experience today. Like I said, this program is brought to you by grant funding, and we are required to report on our work, and would love to be able to share what you're learning and plan to do as a result of attending our webinar. So if you've got a minute, if you could go on to this link. This is a link to our survey, or you can use your phone and scan this QR code. It will take you straight to our survey. And
we put in the chat as well.
Yeah, it's on the chat as well. And let us know how we could improve our webinars better. If you have any suggestions, tell us what you think. We'd love to know. We hope this was a great experience for you. We'd love to see you again, have you again at our future webinars. Visit finance.usu.edu/EFW. You could check out our list of our webinars and links for you to go register. You could also join us on social media. We're on Facebook. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Utah Money Moms. Like I said, we have more tips, tricks, and insights on financial wellness on the blog, utahmoneymoms.com. So thank you again for being with us today.
Anybody have any questions before we say goodbye? Happy to answer them now.
Yep, happy to answer them now.
All right.
We'll send a follow-up email to you guys, just saying thank you again. And some of our materials that we want to share with you and some other resources, we'll send them out to you. We'll also send a recording of this webinar to you and a PDF copy of the presentation so you could keep it for your resources. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining us.